Hello, everybody. Welcome to our last Inside Out of the semester. And it's a pleasure to have Brooke Borel with us, who has been a part of the science writing community in New York for a few years now, and is one of those people who has already shown that she can blog and that she can write excellent magazine stories, and now she's shown that she can write a book too. Lee will tell you more about it, and I'm really looking forward to reading it myself, because based on the reviews, it is absolutely fantastic. So Brooke, thank you very much for being here. And with that, I'll turn it over to Lee Hotz, distinguished writer-in-residence here at the Carter Institute of Journalism, and a science writer at the Wall Street Journal. Okay, Lee.
Thank you, Professor Fagin. So, welcome to Inside Out on such an especially beautiful spring evening. It's a tribute to our guest this evening that any of us are here and not listening to the music in Washington Square or chasing kites in Central Park. So we're here because we're going to have an evening's conversation about the best of our craft, science journalism, science writing. And to focus this inquiry, it's our habit to center on a science journalist who exemplifies the best of what we aspire to create, juggling news and science and literary reportage. This is a conversation, though. It's not a lecture. And so as we proceed, and as we all start to feel the wine, I encourage you to help us digress by offering your own questions, please. And I have to say that tonight the idea of digression, I think, is particularly apt. Many of us come to science journalism in a roundabout way. Maybe we were PhDs who discovered we didn't actually like bench work all that much. Maybe we were English majors who were captivated by physics for poets. Or maybe we just answered that one ad that said, English major wanted. Maybe we were distracted from some more lucrative but less rewarding career by the lure of our own curiosity about the world. So our guest this evening, Brooke Borel, comes to her place in the pantheon at the top of our craft in an unusually circuitous route. And we're going to talk to her about that tonight. But to start, welcome.
Thank you. It was quite an introduction.
Yeah, you're braced.
I hope I live up to that.
You're braced? Oh, I think I have every confidence.
All right.
So, what we want to talk to you about is we want to talk about the juggle, we want to talk about the fear, we want to talk about the big idea, and we want to talk about making it happen. And most importantly, about how the long way around may be the shortcut.
Okay.
So Brooke, as many of you may know, is a contributing editor at Popular Science, where she writes the Modern Plagues blog, and her range of topics there is impressive, from measles in Disneyland to parasitic worm sex. She also writes for TED, for The Last Word on Nothing. She's written for Slate, Eon, PBS's Nova Next, among others. She's covered genetically modified organisms for Modern Farmer. There's a hard audience.
Yeah, that turned out well.
But she joins us at an especially delicious moment for a journalist. Her first book has just come out, Infested, How the Bedbug Infiltrated Our Bedrooms and Took Over the World. It's just been published by the University of Chicago Press and lovingly reviewed in the New York Times lately, which I'll share the following fulsome encomium. Quote, "A book about bedbugs is by necessity a book about nearly everything, about travel and adventure, about our relationship to nature, about how scientists solve problems, about trust and whether we view strangers as friends or foes. It is a book about what people will do under extreme circumstances, and about environmental politics and art and mental illness." This book covers a lot of territory for a very, very small insect. And we want to talk to you a little bit about the craft of that. But I think we should start by retracing your steps a little bit to a childhood in Topeka, Kansas, where, as best I can gather, your formative experience as a science journalist was a Take Our Daughters to Work day.
You did your homework. Yeah, when I was 13, it was, I think, the first ever year for Bring Your Daughters to Work Day, and my dad is a pathologist, and he took me to the hospital with him. And I don't think this was intentional that day, but he was doing an autopsy, and he put me in scrubs and took me in the room, and I watched him undress a dead body, because it was a farmer who was still in his overalls and everything, and I watched him cut the clothes off of this dead body and cut the body open and do an autopsy.
No?
And it was surreal.
Surreal.
Yeah.
Yeah?
But also really interesting. I don't know. It wasn't disgusting. It wasn't weird. I really enjoyed it. It was more weird for me seeing my dad do that work than seeing the actual autopsy.
I mean, was this because your dad was in scrubs or?
Actually, it's because my dad is not like a super he doesn't work with tools and stuff a lot, at least at home. But he pulled out this striker saw and cut these ribs and lifted this chest up, and that was a really bizarre thing, seeing him work in that way. I don't know.
Yeah. So this clearly did not launch you on a career as a medical writer, but what did you get out of growing up in a family that was technical, was medical? I mean, both your father and mother.
Yeah, most of my family was actually medical, and then I also had a grandfather who was a dentist, kind of medical, and a grandmother who was a nurse. I don't know, we always really loved science. I was always enrolled in science camp every summer that was through my school, which is a really great school that really encouraged scientific inquiry for young students. I was just always part of what I was doing, and I always really enjoyed it.
So, dinner table conversation, cadaver of the day kind of thing, or?
Well, yeah, my dad talked about his work a lot over the dinner table. I would have sleepovers, and there's one story he would always tell about this family. It was this old couple. This is really depressing. I don't know if you guys want to hear this or not, but it was an old couple, elderly couple who lived in this shack on this farmland that they had been renting. And they both had died, and there weren't very many remains left because they'd been eaten by a pack of feral dogs. And my dad showed up at this place, and the way he tells it, he showed up, and it was just cornfields in Kansas, and there was a sheriff waiting for him, and he heard all these gunshots, and the sheriff was like, "Don't worry, they're just killing the dogs." And then he had to go through this cornfield and go help. There were police there and everything, figuring out what had happened, but he had to do. He was working as a coroner at the time, and he had to figure out what had happened to these people. It looks like they had been evicted, and they were moving out, and the man had a heart condition and had a heart attack, and the woman was confined to her bed because she was paralyzed, and they both died. No one was around.
You're right. That's an incredibly depressing story.
Yeah. So.
And it's amazing. You ask someone a question, and you have absolutely no idea what you're going to get.
Imagine
Truman
being
Capote novel right there.
Imagine being 10 years old and having your friends over for dinner for sleepovers, and your dad telling that story, and they're like, "What is this? Your family's really weird." And I was like, "I don't know what to tell you. They kind of are." So that was me growing up.
So you were running your high school newspaper. You were mimeographing things in the basement. You have absolutely no interest in writing at all.
No,
right?
I loved writing. I just never.
Loved writing.
In high school I was writing bad poetry. I wasn't writing.
I
was writing bad poetry, and I did get some poems published in the high school end of the year journal, but I'm not, I don't know how great the competition was at my high school. But I was never on a newspaper staff in any school ever.
So if you're the child of a medical family like that, going back generations, I expect you were sort of preordained to go to some technically related field. So you went to BU.
I went to BU, and
Boston University.
Right.
What were you doing there?
I was a biomedical engineering undergrad student, and when I first started, I had kind of an idea that I'd be pre-med, but that didn't last very long. It was a really challenging program, and I had this love-hate relationship with it. I finished it. I didn't change my major, but I considered it many times.
Yeah. So Were you a great disappointment when you didn't go pre-med? I mean, when you didn't go to medical school? You want to get this out of the way, and then
I feel like I'm with my shrink or something. I mean, my parents have always been supportive in everything that I do. I don't think that, I say that, but then even like years after I finished college, my dad would actually every once in a while ask me when I was going to go to medical school to take over his practice, and I was like, I think that ship has sailed a long time ago. But that's like the wishful thinking of a parent, I think. In general, they've been, for a while I was kind of floundering, and I think that they were confused, like, what are you doing? But they were still supportive in their own ways. There was a moment in college when I wanted to switch to English, and they weren't super keen on that, and that's partly why I didn't. But
so you graduated,
I did.
Did your parents come to your graduation? Just checking.
They came to the graduation.
So what then? So you're not going to be a biomedical engineer?
Nope, I was not going to do that.
You're in Boston?
I was in Boston. I mean, this is where just things were, I don't know, I was just had no idea what I was doing. I moved to New York only because, I didn't have like a big dream to come to New York. I moved here partly because I had a lot of friends in college who were from here, and I had a lot of places I could stay for free. And so I was like, I don't know, I'll go there. And that's what happened. So I stayed with a friend up in Yonkers for a month. I stayed with another friend on Long Island for 6 months. The only reason it was for that long partly was because I graduated in 2002 and there was a little recession that year and it was really hard to find a job. So I was kind of looking for engineering jobs. I didn't really want one, but I ended up having this idea that I would go to law school because that's the default grad school people consider.
So you went,
but I didn't end up doing that.
You came from Boston to New York. With no plan.
No plan.
But guided, as I think so many New Yorkers are, by real estate arrangements. You're looking for jobs that you in fact don't want.
Yep.
Then what?
Well, I did a bunch of odd jobs actually for a while. I was like stuffing envelopes. The weirdest job I had, I got hired to help set up conferences at hotels, and one of them, I don't know if this is me like making up this memory, but this is what I remember. It was a conference for heart surgeons who had to practice a new surgical technique. And we had to lay out, it was like in a big banquet hall, and we had to lay out like, it was almost like laying out a lunch tray, but with scalpels and stuff. And then they put a bunch of pig hearts out and did surgery. I don't know, I was doing weird
This is
stuff
interesting.
Like that.
So you're laying out
the
cadaver stuff.
I'm starting
to see I'm starting to see a through line
I was
here,
like primed for that job, I guess. Who knew?
Yeah. Okay, so there you are in New York, odd jobbing in the gig economy.
I don't know, it's a weird gig economy, but yeah, I guess I was. And then I don't know, a friend of a friend, a friend's father actually, he was a big fancy patent attorney in New York, and I went out to dinner with him one night. He was like, you should do patent law. I was like, wow, what's that? That sounds interesting. Words that have never been spoken before or said. No offense to all my patent law friends, but so I was like, well, maybe I'll go to law school. And I'm very glad I did this. I did not start applying to law schools right away. I got a job. I started applying for jobs as a legal assistant, paralegal, whatever you want to call it, with the intent of doing that for a couple of years, seeing if I liked it, and then also building up, the recommendations I would need. And so
to be a patent attorney.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
That didn't last very long. But I did get a job on a team at a fancy New York law firm, and I took the LSAT, and I worked there. Within a few months, I realized I had zero interest in pursuing that for life, for my career.
But I'm given to understand that not only did it pay well, it actually had a very good vacation plan.
It did, yeah. It paid well. I got a month vacation starting out immediately, and I also got they gave a ton of mental health days and stuff, which was necessary.
So there you are in the patent office, which kind of sounds like, I don't know, a Kafka short story, in the patent office.
Yep.
So
exactly
are you
like that.
Again? Are you writing? Are you just cruising? You're working on a novel. Are you still writing poetry? What's going on?
I was definitely not writing poetry. I still was writing a lot just in my free time. I do have 50 pages of a novel that no one will ever see because it's terrible. But I would go home and write a lot. I have a collection of short stories that also no one will see. But that was my creative outlet. And I got this idea that I did want to go back to school, but maybe I would try an MFA, I was not a good candidate. So I applied to a bunch of MFA programs, and they all said, I don't think that you're really what we're looking for, and rejected me. But through that, I actually at NYU, I had to take the GRE for those applications, and I did well on the GRE, and I guess my application was interesting enough that they funneled it to another school. And I got this letter from this other school. It was like, we would like to interview you for a spot. And I was like, this seems like, I actually thought it was kind of a scam at first. I was like, you just want my money. But I started reading about it, and it seemed worth at least meeting with them. And I went and met with the director, and it was a really interesting program where you could sort of build your own curriculum. It wasn't Gallatin, it's called Draper.
Yeah, so this was at NYU. Yeah.
At NYU. And it was a relatively short program, and I could go part-time. And so I decided to go for it. And at the time, talking to them and building what my plan was, I thought that I would still do creative writing, and they had some professors that would allow that to happen for me. But then I got there, and I was still working at the law firm. I tried to leave, and they wouldn't let me. They well, it's not like they chained me to my desk or anything, but I worked well with the team.
They offered you money, probably.
They offered
right?
me money, and they let me,
More vacation.
That's a good. They offered me prorated everything. Like I was working part-time, but they were still willing to give me a pretty decent salary and prorated vacation and stuff, and let me have flexible hours. So I kept working there. I did the program. But in that program, they also have a science studies track.
In the NYU program.
Yeah. And I ended up gravitating towards that. I don't even know at what point, but then it was more academic papers about science, but I really liked that. And that kind of started.
What kind of science? I mean, what?
This is a long time ago.
This is sort of like science and gender theory and.
Yeah, I was also studying gender theory. I mean, so science. This wasn't exactly the science studies of like the 80s or whenever. It was more like looking at that as an area of inquiry and seeing where that went wrong and what went right about it, kind of. And also there's a lot of history of science there.
Uh-huh.
I don't feel totally comfortable saying like I'm a history of science or science studies graduate, because it was a short program. It was sort of a taste of all of that. I mean, some people do PhDs and those things, but it was, we were talking about a lot of different areas of science, especially controversial areas of science, but through a social and cultural lens. That's the language we would have used to describe it.
You're sort of circling back, though. I mean, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
From the cadaver to
I mean, I wasn't thinking about the cadaver at the moment.
Back and around through patent law, which is technical, nothing else.
Yeah, the patent law actually ended up being really helpful in the.
And so then into a formal program, which then spits you out the other side. Now you continue to work, right? So this job that wasn't going to last very long, you were actually there for 5 years?
I was there for over 5 years.
Yeah, over 5
More
years.
than 5 years. It was a long time.
That's a long time for a short time.
Yeah, it was a whole other lifetime actually. And then I finished my thesis. I worked at the job a little bit more. I actually went to Boston on a long trial to help them out, and it was a good reminder why I was not doing that with my life. And I saved a bunch of money, and I quit, and I did some traveling and tried to. This is very cliche. I did some traveling and some soul searching.
Well,
figure out what I want to do with my life. But that is kind of what happened.
So you quit.
Yeah.
And you decided to do some traveling.
Yes.
And you thought, well, as long as I'm traveling, where haven't I been? Why don't I go to Australia?
Yes. That's basically, yeah.
And what happens in Australia?
Well, I had never traveled alone before, and I really wanted to do that, and it was a good time for me to do that, and I had this money saved up, so I booked a flight for a 2-month trip in Australia. And this was actually 6 months. I did a month in Patagonia first, and then I realized I wanted to do more traveling, so I got another odd job answering phones at a financial institution, which was a whole other weird world in New York. But I did that, saving up more money for this trip, and as I was answering phone calls and making people's calendars, I started thinking more about how I wanted to write and how I wanted to figure science into that. And also this was another sort of by chance thing. A friend of mine had another friend who at the time was a really early career science writer, and I ended up chatting with her about her job. How do I do this? How did you do this? And she said, you have to get an internship. And I was not a classic intern anywhere, and it was also too late in the year really to apply to any programs, but I started emailing publications and applying and seeing what was possible. And in my search to do that, I had never read the magazine before, but I discovered Cosmos magazine in Australia.
Cosmos, yeah.
And at the time, they had this little thing on their website that said, yes, we take interns, and are you a foreign traveler, and do you want to work for us for free? And I was like,
did they write
yeah,
that
kind of.
just for you?
I don't know. Someone did. No, I don't really, no one did. It was very lucky. But yeah, so I emailed them out of the blue. I said, hey, I'll be there for 2 months. Can I work for you for free? And they're like, yeah, sure. It was actually really, really the things that people go through for internships. I feel very lucky, but I emailed them. They did ask me for a writing sample, and I sent them, I don't know what I sent them. Not my novel, that's for sure. I sent them like an excerpt from an academic paper, and then they were like, oh, she can write sentences. And they said, sure, come in for 3 weeks. So my trip was completely open. I didn't have any plans yet. I was just gonna go and do whatever. So I ended up, the magazine was then in Sydney, now it's not. I think it's in Melbourne, but I stayed in Sydney longer than I had really planned. I was there for 3 weeks, but they kind of threw me in. They had me like writing news stories. They're like, this is how you write a news story. Call these people and write a story. I was like, all right.
So this is Wilson De Silva.
Yes.
Although
he's not who, the person that hired me was John Pickrell. I don't know if you know who that is, but
all right.
He used to be there. He's not anymore.
No, you were on a roll.
I don't know. You interrupted me.
See, I did.
No, I'm just
Which
kidding.
is always a mistake. It's always a mistake. So, no, here you are. Here you are in Australia. You have, see, what's interesting, I think, about like your circuitous journey, which I'm teasing you about, and I appreciate
we can call it interesting if you want.
Well, I already have, so I'm committed, is that you're picking stuff up with each one of these things. You know, particularly these days, there really is not always a big door marked entrance to our profession or to our craft.
I didn't even know what it was.
Many of us increasingly are self-made, self-made for publications that are in fact self-made. And you are kind of a really interesting and I think excellent example of how you hold on to the interest in wanting to do something as the currents sort of circle you around. Now, it's not normally what I think a person would do. Oh, I'm going to get an internship, you know, but I'm going to end up doing it in Australia.
People do
yes, no, you don't. You don't.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. That's
so what I'm wondering now, when you're in Sydney with Cosmos, what do they have you doing?
They had me writing news stories for the website. I think I wrote 6 or so stories while I was there. And you know, I wasn't just like, they edited me and everything, but they were like, wow, you know how to write a news story. I was like, I don't know. I read, like we've all read news stories, right? I don't think it's that hard to figure out the structure for that. But they had me do that. They had me do some fact checking for another magazine that was at the time housed in the same office space. And then at the end, Wilson actually called me into his office and like gave me this little science writing speech. And he was like, this is science writing. And he was like, this is what science journalism is. And here are the people that you're writing for as a journalist. You're writing for the people. If you want to work as a PIO, you're writing for your boss. You're writing for the museum or whatever institution you're at. And he was sort of breaking it down like that. And he gave me some advice on places I might contact when I get back to New York. And then I went on my way. I don't know, is that weird? That's how I learned how to do it. Yeah, well, I did go to grad school, so I did go to grad school.
She went to grad school.
I mean, it still was NYU. So.
Yeah. So yeah, NYU got the tuition. I mean, I don't think there's a loss there, Dan. I think we're in the black. We're in the black.
But if I didn't know what SHRP was at the time, I probably would have come here, but I had no idea.
But so what I'm trying to understand, is what
I don't know if I can help you.
What is animating you through all this? I mean, why don't you just like, many people will fall into something. And what they fall into, the gravitational effect of life just kind of keeps them there. Like, why are you not still in that patent office?
Because I was really unhappy. I mean, my life was really good then, because my life was very fun then. because it was like there was no direction, and it was like kind of an all-time party. But the work was soul-sucking. It was so boring. It was so, and it was, that's a job. I mean, these were like multi-million-dollar patent litigations that I had zero interest in. And it's like very high pressure. If you make a mistake, it's really a big mistake. It could be very expensive, but the jobs you're doing are like, I've literally sat for hours on end. I don't know if you know what Bates numbers are, but in a litigation, each page of documents has to be marked with a number. And now they do it digitally, and through my tenure as a legal assistant, it became digitalized. But we used to have to put them on with stickers, and you'd have to sit there and like sticker every like boxes of paper, and then if it was like confidential, like attorney confidential privilege or whatever, you have to put those stickers on. And then you would have to make sure you got all the stickers on the page. So you'd have to put this little rubber thing on your finger and like flip through the pages. And I mean, that is like not what I want to do with my life. So I don't think it was really that. I don't think it took that much motivation to say. I mean, of course, if I'd gone to law school, I wouldn't have been doing that. But I saw the.
Well, yeah, you probably would have actually.
Well, no, but the first and second year law students, they're doing or law. Not law students, but the associates. Thank you. Couldn't think of that word. They're doing doc reviews, and that's also kind of. I just saw none of them were happy.
Well, because see, some people, writers particularly, I can do the juggling. I'll have some like soul-sucking, boring day job, and then I'll write, Howl, at night on the kitchen table. So.
Yeah, I tried that, and like I said, the novel is like not anything any of you will ever read.
Well, and I think I just think on behalf of the group, I'll say we're grateful.
Thank you. Yes.
From the way you've described it.
Yeah.
But okay, so you come back from Australia, you come back to New York. This time you have a plan?
I don't know if you would call it a plan. I came back. I just started kind of blindly. Well, first I was in Australia. After I finished the internship, I traveled for another 5 weeks, and then I came back, and I did a little bit of freelancing for Cosmos from a distance. I started answering phones again to make some money, and I just started emailing because the same temp agency. I mean, once they learn you know how to answer phones, I don't know why that's hard, but they're like, wow, you really know how to answer phones well. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you. It's not really that hard. But anyway,
a lot of journalism is just answering phones.
Yeah, I mean, that was another soul-sucking job. But they wanted me back, so I did that to make some money. And they were paying, like financial firms, they were paying me something like $35 an hour to answer phones. Like, this is kind of insane to me. That seemed like a lot of money to me for that job. Anyway, I did that, and I just started emailing magazines, and I was like, hi, I have 6 bylines. Do you want to hire me to write for you? And most of them ignored me. Weird, right? And then
Except the people in Denmark.
Yeah.
They did not ignore you.
Well, it was the American version of that. So there was this magazine, I don't know if any of you know this magazine, Science Illustrated. I had no idea what its reputation was or what it was at the time, but I found the only email I could on the website that was the publisher's email, who didn't probably care to hear from me at all. Like, he doesn't, whatever. I emailed him. I was like, hi, I have 6 bylines I'd like to write for you. And he luckily forwarded the email to the editor who was in charge of that magazine, and she had me in for an interview for an internship. And at the job, she offered me an actual job. She's like, oh, would you rather a job that I'll pay you money? And I was like, well, yeah, I mean.
So, I
don't know why
confronted
that's a
with the choice between working for free and working for money, you chose working for money.
I know, weird.
It is.
Weird.
It is. You are an unusual.
I know.
Unusual person.
Well, but they had just lost a fact checker, so they needed a fact checker.
So you're fact checking.
Yep.
Okay, I want to not torture you like for the entire evening.
I love it.
But this is actually
Bring it on.
The quality of persistence that you're displaying in all of this, I think, is actually pretty interesting, because a lot of us have to sort of fight to get to do what we want to do, and it's always sort of a shock when, we do have to fight, that we do have to take the long way around, that there isn't somebody there saying, hey, you know what, there is, I have a friend who has a job opening at the Washington Post as their, and it pays, that doesn't happen very much. It doesn't happen now much at all. So you really are kind of a poster child for persistence.
Oh, thank you. I mean, at the time, it didn't feel like the long way around because I didn't know what the way was. So I was just kind of floundering
That's why they give
around.
you a rearview mirror.
Right, yeah, it's so neat from
So you're at
the...
Science Illustrated, and then, something interesting happens. You all get laid off.
Oh yeah, I was like, what was the interesting thing? I mean, that was actually a really interesting publication. But so I was there at the time. It doesn't exist anymore in the U.S. It only exists in its natural form as Illustrated Videnskab in Denmark or whatever. It's a very popular magazine there apparently, but they were trying to publish it in the U.S. and I guess it didn't do very well. But it was owned by the same publisher that Popular Science is now owned by. Did that sentence make sense? I don't know. Anyway, they were housed in the same office space, and I was like, The other thing is with that magazine, there was no original content from the people working on it in New York. It was all written in Denmark and then translated, and then we were kind of re-reporting it because the reporting was kind of bad. But I wanted to write, so I started pitching Popular Science.
Which was in the same office suite. Okay.
And then we got laid off.
Okay. So.
But the important thing in there was that I started writing for Popular Science, and then we got laid off, and I was like, oh, I guess I'm a freelancer now. Cool.
Congratulations.
Thanks. I know,
So, you start the blog.
Oh, that was way later.
Way later. So
Yeah.
then what are you doing to start with?
There are a lot actually, the book happened. The book happened right then, actually. So right before we got laid off, I had. Well, we can start talking about the book now because I got Bedbugs in 2004, and then I got them again twice in 2009, and this was 2010. They were in the news a whole lot, and I wanted to do some science-y stories about them, as everyone did. And I wrote a couple
Bedbugs were in the news.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wrote a story for PopSci on bedbugs, a really short news piece. And as I was reporting that, I was like, there were just a lot of interesting things that I thought maybe could be a much larger project. And then 3 days later, we got laid off. Mm-hmm. And then I was like, oh, cool, I have all this time on my hands. What am I going to do? And then I was like, maybe that's a good... I had no idea how to do a book, and I had no idea how difficult this process was going to be, but I was like, oh, maybe I'll do a book. I'll figure out how to do that. And then that happened.
And then that happened.
It wasn't that smooth, but that
No, it wasn't that smooth. So let's
although
unpack
it was way smoother than it maybe had. It was smoother than I realized that there are more difficult paths to books, and mine was actually a lot smoother than it could have been. You seem very stunned. I don't know.
No, I'm just trying to think about.
So here was the timeline.
I had to ask you tactfully about getting rejected at all your publishers, except for the one.
But that was later.
That was later.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that was later. But first, I had to find an agent who's here tonight.
Where?
Hi, Paul.
Thank
Paul.
you for coming. Thank you for coming. Thank you for helping her get a book contract.
Yeah. Thank you.
It clearly was time well spent.
So I had this idea, and then we got laid off, and I ran into a friend a week later, and he was like, oh, what are you up to? I was like, oh, I got laid off. And he was like, what are you going to do? I was like, I have a book idea. And he was like, what's the book idea? And I was like, bedbugs. And then that was it. It was a little bit longer of a conversation than that, but it was a really short conversation. And then a couple weeks later, he emailed me. He was like, do you have an agent? I was like, obviously, I don't know what that is, so no. I mean, I did know what it was, but I was like, I don't know how to do that. And he's a mutual friend of, he's friends with Paul, and he put us in touch. At the same time, another friend of mine who had just written a book, Seth Fletcher, who used to be at PopSci, he wrote this book about the electric car. He also introduced me to his agent, who was not interested in my book, which is fine. But I would have picked Paul anyway. Because we basically met up for a beer. It was very casual, and we're like, yeah, let's try and do this. And he helped me a lot. I didn't have a proposal, obviously, because it was a very short.
So what goes into a proproposal? Well, first I'm curious.
A lot of things.
First I'm curious, and you
That's
can tell me this because he's not here really. He's not actually listening. Surely he must have tried to talk you out of doing a book about bedbugs.
No.
No? Can you give him the microphone?
Oh, you're on the spot.
It came up organically because I was talking to Finn is in my book club, and I was talking about how I wanted to do a book on bedbugs, and he said,
really?
"Oh my God, I know who
I
you
guess
should
I
talk to."
didn't know that part. That's kind of funny. I mean, I
thought
knew
it was
that
my idea.
So you think it's your idea?
I thought so.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
really
Well,
funny.
if it's not,
It
if
wasn't.
it's not prime.
Or we both had the idea at the same
If
time.
it's-
Wow, that's really the universe
Well, you know, good
aligning.
ideas do float around, and people all tend to have them at the same time.
The
Now,
demand
before-
letter for royalties is coming soon.
Yeah. So no, I'm just curious. Before we put the spotlight back on Brooke here, if I may linger for you for a moment. One of the things that's interesting about the book idea is that it's not necessarily something that a publisher or a book buyer might go, oh yay, you know, it's not.
Should have, but yeah.
Well, you know, and they are. I mean, you know, as we'll hear, you know,
Yeah.
it's doing very well, and you're getting a lot of ink, and you're making good reviews, and you're doing the things that you know, good-selling books have to do. Unlike the other 999,000 that were published last month. So,
Yeah, don't
but
tell
I
me
want to
those
know why you
numbers.
thought Bedbugs was a great idea. Think it was really your idea.
Well, so I thought it was this incredibly common denominator because it crossed class lines, it crossed racial lines, and it really was something that I feel like in New York we struggle together. Like rich people get on the subway, poor people get on the subway, old people get on the subway, young people get on the subway. And I thought Bedbugs was compelling in the same sort of way as that. And then I had no idea how historical a commonality it was until Brooke started to dig in on the research. And it has been playing that same role throughout human history.
No,
So-
it turns out to be a rich topic, and you know, as we'll talk in a minute, you certainly have done it justice. But tell us a little bit about the process. This is really a conversation about craft, about mechanics. You've managed to stumble, you know, from one thing to the next. So you really, I think, are an example of the sort of luck favors the prepared adage. You know.
Thank you, I think. Is that a compliment? I don't know. Yeah, thank you?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay,
It's a
good.
compliment.
Thank you.
It's what
I
it
don't
looks
know
like.
that
It's what a
adage.
compliment looks like when it's coming from me.
Okay, good. I'll take it.
Yeah, grain of salt. So, you know, by luck, you meet the one book agent in New York, perhaps, who's already had the idea that you want to write a book about. So that's kind of what I mean when I say luck and well prepared.
Yeah.
But this is about craft. It's about mechanics. What goes into a proposal? What do you need to do?
So a proposal is a little bit, I mean, you need to make sure there's a story and you need to have a plan, but you're also, for nonfiction books, at least my experience, you know, you're not getting paid for this, you want it to be really good, but you're also, you don't have time to report out the entire book. So it's a little bit like you're kind of faking it a little bit. There are chapters in my proposal that would have probably been fine chapters, but and there was enough information to write a chapter on those things, but they ended up getting axed later on when I actually started doing the real in-depth reporting, and the narrative became much clearer to me. But it's like, you know, it's kind of like doing a pitch for a magazine, but much bigger. I mean, it looks like a book almost. You have a table of contents. You have, you know, the structure kind of planned out. For me, I did one sample chapter. Sometimes they require 3, which I think is crazy because that's a lot of work for no you know, definite money coming in when you're freelancing.
So were you having to do independent reporting in order to have enough material to
Yeah,
do the
definitely.
proposal?
I mean,
or,
I did it-
Or were
I
you
did-
working off stuff you'd already done for Popular
No.
Science?
The stuff for Pop Sci was like pretty minimal. I mean, well, some of the interviews, one interview in particular that I did for that, I don't know, 400-word news story was like for an hour or 2 hours on a Saturday. And this woman her name's Deanie Miller at Virginia Tech, and she told me all these like very interesting stories. So some stuff was from those interviews, but I still had to report that stuff out. One of the stories she told me ended up being a big chunk of my sample chapter, which now is no longer a chapter in the book. It's like been cut up and totally moved around. What was the question? I don't know.
The question is, how much, we're starting to talk about the juggle,
Yeah.
really. So you're freelancing for Popular Science.
Yeah,
So
and a
you've
few
got to
other
feed
places.
the landlord, you've got to keep the refrigerator stocked. Unless you're still working for the patent attorney, which I
No,
don't think so.
I
Yeah.
was not.
So preparing a proposal, doing all that reporting, that's a lot of invested time, let's
Yeah,
put it that way.
it
So that's what
was.
I was trying to get at.
So I think Paul and I first met it was sometime in the winter, like February or March or something, and it was great. He gave me some sample proposals from nonfiction science books that had been sold, or I don't think they even were all science books, but nonfiction books, and that really helped me figure out the structure of how this works. I mean, of course, everyone's a little bit different, and that was just helpful as far as organizing and seeing how much work I needed to do. I did do one reporting trip for the sample chapter. Went down to DC and watched this guy feed bedbugs on his arms, which was fun. And what else? I mean, I did a lot of the stuff. I didn't do a ton of phone calls. I did some phone calls, but for me, because we don't know if it's going to get sold yet, I had some chapters. I had one chapter. Here's a chapter that I use as an example a lot. I teach a class on putting together a book proposal. It's way more organized than what I'm telling you right now, so please take it sometime. It's actually kind of fun. Anyway, there's one chapter in the proposal that was about all the legal stuff that's going on with bedbugs, and I wanted to go to a court case and sit in on it and have those be the scenes, which I should have known better after working in a law firm that would actually probably be really boring. But that aside, I identified some people that I could interview for that and could maybe be that person that I go and sort of profile-ish for that chapter. But I never contacted them and said, hey, can I come hang out with you? Because by the time the book got sold, if it got sold, it would have been a year. I mean, you don't reach out to all the people that might be in the book at that point, at least in my opinion, because you don't know what's going to happen. So you identify yes, these people exist, these things are happening, this is a real story, but you pick and choose how much you report out for each of those
That's interesting, because I think one thing that's sort of daunting to people at this stage is looking at the proposal and thinking well, really in order to write the proposal, I need to have completely reported out the book and written a couple of chapters,
Nope.
and. So what you're
Turns
saying
out
is
no.
you sort of write a proposal about a book you might write, but not necessarily the book you will write.
It's almost like the cliff notes of a book that doesn't exist. I mean, it's here's what a book like this would feel like to read.
Uh-huh.
I don't
Brooke,
know.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
I mean, maybe your experience was different. I don't know.
I mean, to me, that the thing is to always decide: is this really even a book, or is this really just a cool story for Esquire or something about me and the bedbug? And it's interesting to me that you were really just still kind of getting going on having a robust freelance churn, that you decided to just go for it. And
That's my mojo, apparently.
yeah.
It is
So why did you do that?
The reason why I thought it would work for a book is because bedbugs can go. There are so many different areas that it touches. Like that little thing that you read from the New York Times, actually, which was very kind of them to say. But it really is a story about everything. I mean, it goes into all kinds of facets of human life, and because of that, I knew and because I'd had them before, I think that was a personal angle that could tie things together.
Well,
Although
in
at
fact,
first I was kind of reticent to put myself in it as
You
much.
didn't just
but
have that. I mean,
ended
you're
up in it a lot.
allergic to bed bugs.
I'm very
right?
allergic to
Very
bed bugs.
allergic to bed bugs.
Yeah.
So this becomes an interesting research topic.
I mean, it was personal.
Yeah.
I'm gonna
But why
yeah.
did you feel like you were
Right.
going to go straight to a book as opposed to, I see a really good 3,000 or 4,000 word, magazine piece out of this.
At the time,
it's
I'd
very
written
kind
one
of
3,000 word piece, and that was it. I didn't really necessarily have. I think that was also another bit of luck. I didn't really know. No, I don't know. I didn't have the experience to really make that distinction and I wanted to write a book, and I thought it was going to be a book, and I just did it. So I think now I probably would think through it with a little bit more.
Why did you want to write a book?
I mean, for the same reason I have 50 pages of a novel you're never going to read. I just always wanted. I love books. I always wanted to write one. So, I mean, whether that was I don't think that's necessarily always a right idea to push a project forward that maybe could be something else. I don't know, but I guess I just had a hunch that it was something bigger than a magazine story.
Yeah, I mean, I ask because there are a lot of people here who have big ideas and gee, this could be a book, this could be a book. But many of us, pause sort of and say, I think what I'll do instead is try to pitch a magazine piece or I mean, you really just went for it at a moment in your career where that would not be a natural move.
No, it definitely wasn't. And but seriously, I'd only written one narrative. I'd only published one narrative story at that point. It was only 3,500 words. So I really didn't know what I was doing. But I think that part of it was like having the confidence that like Paul was there and he was like, no, we can do this. He lent some confidence to that process. And I guess I figured I might as well try. And then if it didn't work out, I could maybe do an Atavist story or like some other longer piece that maybe wouldn't be a book length. I felt like it was a little bit more than a magazine feature, I guess. I don't know if I'm like projecting my experience now back on it or not. I guess I just figured the opportunity was there, so I would go for it.
Well, I mean, I think, forgive me, Dan, for paraphrasing, but I mean, part of what we're getting at here is that, you know, there's a moment in a career normally where you're like, yeah, you know, it's time for me to sort of step up to the big one. But I mean, you were sort of stepping up to the big one before you'd done very many of the little ones. So
right.
Are you incredibly brave? Are you foolhardy? Is it an advantage not to know better?
I didn't know any better. I didn't know.
Yeah, I mean
that.
Respectfully.
No, but I think that there's an advantage to that too. I think there's an advantage to not really know what the barriers are and just to try. If I knew, I don't know, if I had gone to a journalism program and saw how it can be a struggle sometimes and done all that, I might have been more intimidated to try it. And I didn't have any experience to show me at that point, like, oh, this is going to be really hard. It's just like, oh, I want to do this. So I don't know. I think that can actually be an advantage sometimes to not know how hard something is going to be.
So you did your proposal, and you handed it over to that nice man in the back. And as long as you're here, if you don't mind, what did you do with this proposal? How do you shop it?
We worked on it for a while, so
Rewrites.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
So we got it to the best form possible. I thought Brooke actually did an excellent job describing proposals, which I describe to clients as the idea of a book. It's not an outline for a book, it just makes other people think of what a book could be. So at the time, I would guess as a trend in publishing, there were sort of micro-histories and idea books, and this fit into sort of a trajectory of the publishing cycle 3-ish years ago, right? 2012, give or take?
Do you remember what's
It's a little bit long.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I was just going to ask.
Well, so one of the big ones was, one of the ones we were using was Robert Sullivan's book Rats, and that was
Rats,
okay.
And that
that
was
was an
longer ago,
interesting.
yeah.
What you say?
That one was like 2005, but that was a really good.
It was still very much.
Yeah.
And his editor. It was
Early.
interesting. That book was at Holt, I think, and his editor really liked Brooke's proposal and had tried to get Sullivan. She tried to do a book on bedbugs at Holt and couldn't get through her editorial board. So what I didn't expect was the amount of resistance that people felt towards how gross the topic, like that they would accept something like
You
rats.
did not expect resistance.
I didn't expect that resistance, no. I think that it was one of my first books too. And I think that the world also rewards audacity. So you should do things if you have the opportunity and the will. So we went out really wide, and there's a big community of readers for science books, and we got great reads, and we put ourselves in the best position to make the deal that we could, and Chicago offered us the best terms, and I think on a journalism level, I think that worked well for Brooke because the book was going to be peer reviewed, and it lends an additional level of credibility to the research, which is now played into, I'm sure you'll get to this in a minute, her next project.
So if I can just linger for just a second.
Yeah.
So what's the trade-off between going, say, for a university press, University of Chicago, University of California, Riverside, one of those things, and sort of trying for a big, Simon and Schuster, or, is the attention different? Is the treatment different? What?
Well, it's very hard to sell a book. Let's just put that out there so everyone who wasn't aware of it before knows that. And we had people interested, and Chicago offered us the best terms, including major trade houses that we were talking to at the time. And the difference is so this is through the Chicago's trade imprint. It's not through their scholarly imprint.
Uh-huh.
And they've done an exceptional job in terms of what they've been able to do. Like, we got the book in a New York Times book review last week. We have had great pickup in the press. Brooke is, obviously a wonderful personality, and she arranges a lot of this on her own, but we've been on NPR. We've done lots with the book at this point, and I think that's a credit to Chicago. They published maybe a little bit slower than a trade press would have. It took a little bit longer to get it to market. They actually focused maybe more on the packaging than we might see at a trade press. If you look inside that book, you'll see a detail that I don't know that I've ever seen in a book in terms of the typesetting and font work.
The only thing I can think of even comes close is some of the books that
There are bugs in there.
Rebecca Solnit has gotten published, which have
it's
weird little marginalia things. So what he's talking about, this book, which is lovingly published, has got bed bugs in it. I mean, printed, right? They don't come off. It's not
People
true.
have told me they've been reading in bed, well, when they're brave enough to do that, and that they open it up and they're like,
Yeah. And it's not true that you get bed bugs from library books, just for the record.
yeah,
But
very unlikely.
it's full of diagrams and photographs and things that many publishers just don't want to fool with. This is all extra work for them.
I collected all those images, though.
I'm sure you collected all those images,
And
and also there's a level of how shall I say, whimsy that they clearly sort of tolerated. I mean, it has something like it's a well-documented book, so it's got 21 pages of footnotes. You often will argue.
I didn't even know that.
Well,
I'm just kidding. I didn't know how many pages it was.
There you are. But in addition to that, it has a number of appendices, and the appendices themselves are interesting, and it sort of reflects something about your sensibility. So there's a bedbug question and answer thing, like if you really want to know if you can get bed bugs from library books, well, our bedbug expert, Ms. Brooke, will tell you. But there's also an appendix that attempts, as best I can tell, the first and perhaps most comprehensive catalog of songs about bedbugs.
Well,
and there are 66 of them.
There are more than that, actually.
I don't doubt it.
I think that was a collection. I also had a Tumblr that I was doing, and I was posting a different song every week for an entire year of just the best ones. There are a lot of bedbug songs.
If I were a cruel man, I would ask you now to sing us a bedbug song.
Oh, we are not
But
doing that.
we're not going to do that. But I will ask you.
gonna...
I will ask you though to just favor us, because there's also an appendix of literary references to bedbugs. From Ginsberg to Goethe. But there are also Appendix 4. I call your attention to, consists of bedbug limericks written by our esteemed guest. And I would wonder if you would favor us with a reading of the limerick of your choice.
Okay. Limerick 1. I never titled them. This is Limerick 1. There once was a sea lectularius whose odor was very nefarious. He smelled like old fruit, so foul and acute, so nasty it was quite hilarious. These were written when I was really tired. I'm not joking. Well, one of them is actually written for a post I did at the Last Word on Nothing. But I had these collected, and then I also did a Kickstarter to help raise a little bit of money for travel, which we can get at in a minute. But some of these were also written for that because one of my sweet donors, one of the rewards levels was I would send them a limerick as an email, and they went for it. So thanks, guys.
So you kind of asked brought up the next topic, which is so most people, they get a book contract, they get an advance. And then they, go immerse themselves in their topic, lock themselves in their basement, and have emotional problems and rewrite things and whatever.
Well, that might have still happened. I don't have a basement, but
Well, let's see. Well, there you are. There you are.
the
So in the
rest.
garret, right? In the Brooklyn garret.
yeah, closet office.
One of the things that's very interesting about this, and one of the things that's kind of interesting about you, you didn't have the advance was not enough to actually cover the production of this book.
No, I mean, and I'm very grateful for it, but it was.
Oh, well, I don't think they'll feel bad because the end result was good and reflects to them. You had to go out and raise additional money to fund the reporting of this book.
I had to raise additional. I didn't have to raise additional money in order to do the book I wanted to do. I had to raise additional money, or go bankrupt.
Because I think many authors feel that way, no matter how big the advance is. He or she thinks, if I only had, then I could go spend that year in China, But what did you do?
The first project I did, it was so at this point I'd done a lot more reporting and I was writing and I just realized all of the trips I wanted to take, especially internationally. And I just didn't have the funding for it, so I did a Kickstarter. And now Kickstarters actually, they've started a program for writers, you should all be aware of this, where they will actually help you develop a project that's, they have someone in charge of that. I can tell you more about that later. I can't remember, what's her name, Maris? Yeah. But at this point, they didn't really have something like that. But I had donated to friends' Kickstarters, and I was like, how hard can it be?
Well, how hard was it?
It's really hard.
It's really hard.
Yeah, it's really hard.
Tell us a little bit about it. People tend to sort of think of Kickstarter in terms of, I have my app that I want to do, which automates picking desserts in expensive restaurants or something.
That's true, but there's a lot of art projects too.
Yeah.
There's a lot of art projects. There are a lot of documentary films. I felt like a book certainly was on. There were other books at the time. There just wasn't such a formalized thing around them. But I decided I needed to be very transparent about it. I wanted to say yes, I have a publisher. Yes, they gave me some money. No, it wasn't enough for what I want to do. Here's what the money is for. I also wanted to talk to the publisher and make sure they didn't feel like I was, slighting them somehow by saying that and being, I talked to everyone about it. Can I do this? Is this okay? What do you think? And they're like, yes, do it.
The publisher was supportive?
Yeah, and I thought it was better to have the conversation with them rather than to surprise them that I was telling people that I needed more money. But I was just think that when you're doing a project like that, it has to be very contained. It has to be like, here's what it's for. It's not just like, you're not handing me a lump of money and then I'm just going to, I don't know. I had planned, here are the places I want to travel, here's what I want to do. It wasn't like itemized for how much everything would cost. But Kickstarter is tough because you have to, you do a modest goal because if you don't hit it at all, you don't get any money. So I set it at 5,000, knowing I would have liked to have more of it, thinking that was reasonable. I made my own animation that I spent.
Because you have to,
ridiculous
for Kickstarter, you have to kind of make something. It's not just put up a help wanted sign.
And you really, honestly, you should have a video. Like you should have something that draws people in. Most of my supporters were people that I do know otherwise, but I did get some random people that just, came across it and were really supportive. Actually, some of them gave the highest level of money and got their name in the book because that was my highest reward.
Well, what were the rewards? So you got a limerick?
The first one was I sent them a song. Not me singing,
okay.
but I sent them a link to
I was about to renege and have you start singing. So.
I sent them like a link to here's a Bedbug song you didn't know existed and it's awesome and a thank you. And then I made an animation and it was just me. Like I sometimes draw little cartoons. We won't get into that, but I already had this weird skill of drawing really bad cartoons. So I made it my first ever animation. I did the voiceover for it. I did sound effects. What are you doing? What's in there? That's making me nervous.
I was looking for your animation.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's all. Yeah. When they pull out the pink folder, you're in trouble.
I don't know what that means.
Brooke, I don't think you realize the amount of research that Lee does to prepare for these things.
Oh, God. It's like,
Soon he'll be talking about your darkest family
oh,
secrets.
God. Well, we already talked about the autopsy my dad took me to, which was probably not, the best thing he could have done. Anyway.
That got us off to a good start.
Kickstarter. So I did the animation.
Kickstarter. There are certain requirements that you have to hit for Kickstarter.
Yep.
You need to have a video, an animation, a something or other to
You don't
post.
need to, you should. I mean, I think that you're not going to get...
Well, what do they ask you for? What do they
I mean, you
make
have to
do?
you have to write up like what this is for, animations or videos or whatever was good. I didn't want it to be just me talking to the camera, which is partly why I did an animation. You have to offer rewards, and you should make sure the rewards are something you can deliver on and is not going to, it shouldn't cost you a huge amount of extra money, because then what's the point? So that's why I did the lowest one was like a thank you and a link to a song. Some of them were limericks and a link to a song. I think another level up, I printed out postcards that were stills from the animation and mailed those to people. Electronic copies of the book, just different copies of the book, different levels of signing of the book. And the highest one was if you would get all of those things, or not all of the books, you would get a hardcover of the book and all those other things, and I would sign the book and I would put your name in the acknowledgments as well.
And now how do you...
There are reasons to do that too, beyond just the $5,000 that you raise. Whether you realized you were doing this or not, but that is just to build community around the book.
Yeah,
and,
it's a
and
marketing
build sort of
thing. It's a community.
group of people who are invested in the book. In your case, literally invested.
And that's what Kickstarter is also for. It's not just
Yeah.
to raise money; it's to find your people in a way. So,
How did you call attention to the Kickstarter campaign?
social media, email. That's it. Those two things are it. Yeah. And then there's an option to do updates on the actual program, and I did those as well.
So in the end, you got 93 people to pledge a total of $5,900.
Yep.
And what did you do with that? How critical was that to your
I went
book?
to Vegas.
Big
No,
party.
I actually don't like Vegas. That money mainly went to travel, some local trips, and then also for the book, I did a almost 3-week-long trip that started in the UK, in London and Sheffield, and then I flew to Prague, and I was there in both Czech Republic and Slovakia for most of my trip, actually. And then I went through Germany to Mannheim on Rhine. Is that how you say that town? It's been a long time since I've actually said that out loud. I went there for like one day, and then flew home I think I went back to London and flew home. So that was like a whirlwind. I was reporting almost every day that I was there.
So
Or
it
writing.
actually accounted for a crucial chunk
Yeah.
of the
I
reporting
wouldn't
of the
have been.
book.
I mean, yeah, and that's an amount of money that I would have been really heartbroken to put on my credit card and have it be something I would still be paying off or
But
something.
you still needed more funding.
Yeah. I mean, we always need more funding.
And so what did you do?
Actually, through a recommendation on a friend who had also successfully done this, I applied for a book grant through the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, and that was another. And when you do these things, it's a big time commitment. So you really have. It might not pay off. So
The
it's
foundation application is a
Yeah.
big time commitment.
and even the Kickstarter too. I mean, if I had not succeeded in that would have been pretty heartbreaking to spend that much time trying to do this thing and then not even get the money to do the other thing. And I could have been writing that whole time.
There is that.
So, and that was the same thing with the application for the book.
So how did it work with the Sloan Foundation? They have a special program that funds books.
Yeah, and there aren't any deadlines. You basically have to contact them and get permission to apply. And then, so I did that, and they said, yeah, you can apply, but no guarantees. And so I put this application together and sent it in, and I didn't hear from them for a really long time, and I kept checking in, like, oh yeah, we're gonna get to it soon. And almost an entire year went by, and then they were like, oh, we're ready to review your proposal. And I was like, and the book had actually changed a lot at that point, and I thought it was much better. So I was like, can I send a new proposal? And they're like, yeah, send whatever you've got. So I actually redid the proposal, which was also time consuming, but I redid it and resubmitted it, and they accepted it, and that was nice. It was very nice.
So to fund this book, an advance from a publisher, a Kickstarter campaign, and a Sloan Foundation grant. See, that's very persistent.
That's a nice way to put. I don't know. That's how.
No,
That's how I roll.
It is. I think
If
a
I
lot
want to
of
do
people
something, I'm going
would
to try and
have
figure out how to do it.
just said, oh, I'll just write the book I can afford.
I mean, I get it. No, I get it. But I would have been really unsatisfied with that. I don't think it would have been very good. I don't think that this particular book would have been as good doing that. I don't know.
The thing about finding other ways, beyond your advance is that the advance is really the industry's way of saying this is what we expect you to earn back.
Yeah.
And the thing in publishing is that you must always exceed expectations. And if you don't exceed expectations, it's going to be really harder the next time. So whether you realized it or not, by going with an academic publisher, taking a relatively modest advance, you were doing something really smart. The downside is that you don't get much money, but the upside is you're setting yourself up to really exceed expectations, which you
Set the bar low.
which you already have by a long shot by getting a great review in the Times. So it was a brilliant, if unintentional, plan.
That could be a motto for my career.
Yeah.
Brilliant, but I don't know about the brilliant. Thank you, but unintentional.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
Hey, this is a bit of a side question, but
Yeah,
on the general topic of science reporting, I have a question for you. You have this amazing blockbuster stuff in your book about how gross bedbugs are. You have stuff about bedbug sex that just goes over well with every audience that Lee hasn't gotten to. I'm sure he will. But you also have these other amazing stories in the book about how bedbugs were used in Vietnam and these other not quite blockbuster stories that are still amazing stories. And my question is when you're faced with a topic where you have such amazing blockbusters, how do you get the secondary stories out to people that are maybe more interesting and maybe even more applicable than just bedbug sex is so weird, but they were actually used in the Vietnam War, and this is an incredibly interesting, important story. How do you get those stories out when you have these bigger stories that people are more interested in?
Do you mean within the book or in talking about the book?
Mostly in talking about it, but also within the book.
So that's something I've been kind of struggling with because, so the excerpts we've done so far have been those kind of flashier things because, you are using those to try and market the book. Like the Vietnam thing, for example, that's the excerpt we used for Gizmodo. But then we did a Q&A, and it wasn't about that. It was about, I will answer whatever questions I can that you have about bedbugs. I am working on an essay for Slate right now that I don't know how much I can talk about it, but it's a much more practical. I'm trying to do both. I'm trying to do some more practical things that are things people want to know, and that are more practical about the psychological impacts, and also just practical, here's what you do to try and not get bedbugs in a hotel room, which I'm also working on a piece. I'm doing a lot of pieces to do both because I think they're both really important.
Mm-hmm. No, but I think you've raised also a really interesting and knotty writing organizational problem, which is no, I mean,
naughty.
Oftentimes.
Oh, sorry, we're talking about bedbug sex. I was that kind of naughty. Carry on. Sorry.
Turnabout is fair play. Which is you've got a really incredible grab bag in Reporter's Notebook of stuff. It's not the story. Often these natural narrative organizational things that we'll fall into. Here is the story of Dan, who, bless his heart, is gonna pour us more.
Don't
After the naughty joke.
I think we're not getting into it.
Cheers.
You're not pruning it back to this is going to be the story of Ben Lilly, who revolutionized bedbug. This is not going to be the story.
You did? I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I missed that in my reporting.
This is the Carl Zimmer evolutionary biology poetry of bedbugs. You've got a lot of different stuff, and you don't take any of those approaches. So I'm kind of wondering how you decided to string these pearls together this way.
A lot of it was, again, I was still learning how to put a narrative together, especially one so big. But ultimately, what started emerging is that my experience, and when I got feedback from readers, they were like, we want more of you in here, which I had been holding back on. So that, it really is sort of the story of me unfolding. It's almost like a quest tale, like the classic quest tale, where it starts out where I'm actually in the doctor's office, and he was drawing a line around this bite on my leg that was this big and it was sticking out like this. And he said, if the redness goes beyond this line, you should go back to the emergency room. I was like, really spent the rest of the day at work at the law firm, like with my leg up and like, is it going? And it didn't, and I was fine. But so it was sort of that launching point and saying, why is this happening? Why am I hearing about this all the time now in the news and media and on comedy shows and whatever? Why is this happening? I'm going to go on a quest and figure it out. And so I'm not like, I fade in the background a lot too, but that's sort of, it really is almost, not entirely, but a chronological thing of like, here's what I learned. I mixed some things up in the middle of the book to make more sense, but...
The Adventures of Brooke in Bedbug Land.
I've been describing it as a popular science, popular history, and an adventure tale, because that's kind of what it is. It's not totally only a science book, really. Did I answer your
Can I ask
question?
a question?
Yeah, please.
Sorry.
No.
So I loved your book. I thought it was really, really great. And I thought it was really well structured. And I'm wondering how much of that I'm kind of amazed that you had never done, or you'd only done one 3,000 word feature. Like, did you get edited? How was did you have a lot of interactions with your editor? Or did you find that through other means? Or like, how did you come to that?
I kind of found it through hit or miss. I also think that, I read a lot, and I think that that's something that all of us, if you read a lot, you have sort of a natural, when you're reading things with fresh eyes. When you're writing a book too, and you go back to the beginning and start reading through, it's almost like someone else wrote it. You're like, I don't remember writing that. So you can kind of go through and think of it and like you're reading someone else's book and, oh, this isn't working. But there wasn't a lot of editing. There's not a lot of editing that happens in the book world. I don't know, can I say that? Am I getting my editor in trouble? Like there's just not a lot that happens, at least in my experience and in the experience of a lot of people I've talked to. So there was some editing, but not structure stuff. But what I did do is I sent out, before my first draft was due, I sent it out to, I think, 4 friends, some of whom are science writers and editors, one who likes to read those kinds of books, but is not in the world at all, and they gave me feedback. So that was for my first, and then I reworked things into that according to what they suggested that I liked. And then a nice thing about the university press is they gave me 3, this is a peer review thing that Paul was talking about earlier, 3, they're supposed to be anonymous. I'll get to that in a minute. 3 anonymous reviewers who then gave me comments, and 2 of them were entomologists, and they gave me some good comments, from a science perspective. Oh, I also had an entomologist who wasn't in the book very heavily, who I think had a good outside perspective because he's from Australia. He read it also, and then I also fact-checked it and stuff. Like, he helped me read it, though, for factual stuff about the science. Anyway, one of the anonymous readers, who wasn't anonymous because they accidentally left his name on the thing that they sent me. They don't know that they did that. I never told them. Now they know. He gave me some really good points on some things I could tie. Like, the middle chapters didn't have much of me in them, and he said, I want that there. So I found the places where I could tie that in, and then put that. That really helped me. One of them was. One of them was I looked him up. He was like a journalism professor, and he gave me literary advice.
Just to pin Dan's question down, so the readers that the University of Chicago Press sent your manuscript out to, they were doing that for fact-checking purposes or just for
reader input? Sort of. I mean, one of them was more heavily fact-checking, I think, just because of the way I also know who that one is because he actually sent me a text message, and he said, hey, I'm reading your book for Chicago. I don't understand why you didn't put more of my research in it.
Yeah.
So
and I was like, that was supposed to be anonymous, but thanks for letting me know.
On the university press side,
Yeah.
Okay.
just jumping back in,
Yeah.
they have like boards of governors, and they have to meet academic standards in order to publish books, even through their trade divisions. So the peer review system is set up to sort of cover them they don't want the sort of fiasco to take place that something is either wrong in one of their books or sort of questionably researched, so it's not specifically fact-checking, it's not specifically literary, but it doesn't meet the standards of the press in general. But most university presses have that, both for their academic and trade divisions.
But the feedback is to the author, not to the press?
We all see
Or
it.
both? Or?
The
We all
feedback
see
is
it.
both, and one of the things, it's a very weird system where even though they've paid in advance and purchased the book, they may not be able to publish the book if it fails at the peer review level. or it
Which I
might need
didn't
to
know
be-
at the time.
I
Everyone
never
was like,
told
oh
you.
good, they accepted it. And I was like, what?
Yeah, Christy was
that a
much
question?
more attuned to that success than you were.
That's funny. But so maybe I lucked out that one reviewer gave me some advice on structure, but it was really helpful.
So you say, what you read matters in terms of what
I don't
you
think
ultimately
necessarily
write. So
what
I'm,
you
I'm
read,
curious,
but-
well, what do you read?
Well, I'm in a book club, and we read almost all fiction and a really wide range of stuff. I also like to watch I watch a lot of TV. I watch a lot of narrative TV shows, and I use the excuse of that's another way to look at narrative pacing. It's a different thing, but it helps you see how stories are put together in a different way that I personally think is helpful. Maybe that's my excuse to watch all the HBO shows. Yeah. I don't know. I think that thinking about how stories are put together as you're reading them, and reading a lot of stories and doing that also with stories that didn't work for you, is really helpful.
I want to talk about tools for just a second. You've been really very good humored about this. So I'm just curious, where literally do you write? What do you write on?
I have a little MacBook Air, but I have it plugged into a huge screen at home with a proper type, keypad, and I write there.
Is this like in front of a window in a broom closet?
In front of a window, in
on
front
the
of
roof
the
of a-
second bedroom in my apartment that would not be wide enough to fit a twin bed. I mean, it's a very long, narrow thing. That's a good office, actually. A window looking over a very busy street with a lot of weird stuff that happens that distracts me sometimes.
Yes, we have a question?
This seems like it has so many facets to it, and I'm sure that you had all sorts of research angles and research details. How did you keep everything organized technically?
That's actually a really good question, because the way I learned how to organize documents was at the law firm, actually. I mean, I was responsible for being able to get my hands on any document that someone asked me for out of millions and millions of pages. So I didn't have anything so sophisticated as that, but as far as like having, if you've worked in a magazine before, you might have worked on a shared drive and seen how things are organized for different issues of the magazine. Probably what I do is similar to that, but I don't use Scrivener or anything like that. I usually write in Word. I have folders for each of my chapters that I drop in, PDFs or links, or like maybe a Word document with links that I definitely need to go back to. And, that's Word searchable too, usually. So if I find, that way when I'm reading or when I'm writing, and sometimes my brain will like think about something else that would go better in another chapter. And I usually will also have a Word document that I have for each chapter, and I'll go in and just write some notes to myself there. I don't know, a lot of that I learned at the law firm. Thanks, law firm.
Well,
Thanks,
it is
boring
interesting.
job.
You do seem to have picked useful things up.
Who knew?
Who knew? Who
Yeah.
knew? So I'm also curious along the same lines. You used as a reporting technique or as an organizational technique at one point in working on this manuscript, you started doing a little data mining
A little bit, yeah.
to try and look for some research trends and things. More of us are trying to do that sort of thing now, but aren't completely clear on the sorts of things we might do. How did you use it as a tool?
I did that twice, actually, and I don't know if the amount of time I spent on that for the amount that it actually ended up in the book, I don't know if it was worth it or not, but it was kind of interesting. I had two major Excel sheets. One was of all the patents I could find through various searches on bedbugs. There are different services that you can do to pull those pretty easily, some free services and also some paid ones. And then the other one was a series of all of the journal articles I could find on bedbugs going back, as far back as I possibly could. And the reason I did that one was because everyone had told me that research had really dropped off completely, and there was no research that was happening after World War II until the late 2000s, really. And That's not what I found, though. I wanted to make sure that they knew what they were talking about, because how would they know? I mean, I didn't really trust that they really knew that, because they weren't looking at it. So I went through and I found that there was, and that's actually partly how I found that Vietnam story, actually, sort of. But I was going through and making sure they were right, and I found that there was some work going on that I thought was worth mentioning and knowing about. Don't know if that answered your question either.
Yeah, no, I was just curious because I saw the graphs that you had published. And
I did a little blog post on that.
you did. So you're right now at a kind of interesting moment. You are in the first flush of publication, of reviews, of talk show appearances, radio interviews. I mean, how are you juggling all of that? You're still having to sort of make a living, right?
Yeah, you're right. I haven't
we're paying
been
attention
sleeping,
to you,
actually.
but the attention is free.
Yeah, it's been kind of hard. My next book is due July 1st, and the timing is kind of tough. I usually schedule things out and I figure out when I need to turn them in, and I use my Google Calendar a lot, and I actually put all of my deadlines for every day, either deadlines that I want to hit, so I'll make my own deadlines and put them on the calendar and say this thing is due this day, and then here's the day I'm going to edit it, and here's the day I'm going to turn it in or whatever. I use that to try and juggle everything, but I do have I have some pieces that I'm working on that are paid pieces right now that are helping. I got the second half of my advance, which was nice.
Oh, that's key. Yeah.
That's helpful. And then I'm trying to line up stuff. And I think that with the next book, I might even get the second half of the advance when I actually turn it in, which was a little different setup. So there are things coming in, but it has been really hard because I can't complain about having the press. It's really nice, but there have been interviews almost every day. I have to Skype with someone on Saturday at exactly 11:33 in the morning. What? So I don't know, I have to be for some radio show. Some travel radio show, but why not? I'm going to do it. I'm going to do them all.
I have a quick question about you. While you were working on the book, you were also doing features for PopSci and blog posts. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little about shifting mentally from book length to blog post to feature. How do you do that?
Good question.
It's so hard. I mean, I feel like I spend a lot of my time just sitting there trying to move my brain from this to that. I talked about this actually a little bit at the NASW thing we did last year. A lot of it, I would take projects, and I was taking a lot of projects that I really wanted to do, but I was avoiding doing too many narrative pieces because those are so hard to pitch and get accepted and report and write. So I was taking on more package features and assignments that maybe normally, there were some sort of one-off assignments people would email me and ask me if I would do something for them, and it was even people I had never written for before, but who had gotten my name somehow. And those were projects, they were interesting, but they weren't really my thing, but I took them on anyway. Because I was fact checking too, which I think if you can pick up research and fact checking, that kind of work where you aren't having to think about pitching and thinking about story structure, you're just having to use this other part of your brain a little bit. It's really very hard. I hope that if I do the next book, after the one I'm doing now, which I'm doing the same thing with, I hope that eventually there might be a project where I can focus a little bit more deeply on it and not move back and forth so much.
Do you want to tell us what the next book is about?
It's about fact-checking, actually.
It is about fact-checking.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, working on a book about fact-checking while this is out has given me
fear.
Anxiety dreams every night.
Fact-checking,
I
dreams.
I feel like I've gotten everything
Wake up in the
wrong
middle of the
my life.
night. What did I do wrong? What?
That's been my sleep schedule lately, actually. Yeah, it's been happening a lot. It's a fact-checking guide. This is another example of things sort of being very lucky in the way they worked out. I was in Chicago for AAAS last year, and that was the first time I had met my book editor in person because she's in Chicago, I'm in New York, and we sat down to talk about the Bedbug book. And first of all, I had bedbug bites all over my arms and neck because I got bed bugs in my hotel room, so that happened.
Is that a good omen? Is that a good omen? What do you think?
I mean, it's in the book. It made a nice bookend for the book. But so the first time I met her, I was all frazzled and I had bites all over me and it felt like a crazy person. But we were just going through where the book was. I had just turned in the manuscript 2 weeks before the first manuscript. And I told her, and I've already gone through the fact checks, so it'll just be a matter of anything I add later will need to be fact-checked by me, but I did it. She's like, what do you know about fact-checking? I was like, I don't know, I've done it before. I had just started teaching a class on it. I teach at the Brooklyn Brainery, and I was telling her about that. And she happened to have a colleague who was had been looking for a couple of years actually for someone to write this guide. Same division that does the Chicago Manual of Style, but for fact-checking. And she said, maybe you guys should talk. And we did, and they had me put together, I still had to do a proposal. But it's been pretty fun. I've interviewed more than 80 people at different magazines. I've interviewed people that do fact-checking for radio shows and television shows. And it's sort of like, why do we fact-check? What is fact-checking? Why is it important? And then also like how to do it.
And there are no shortage of examples of what happens to you when you don't do it.
Right. So reading all of those examples, at the moment my book has come out, is where a lot of my recent anxieties have come from. Because I did fact check the book, but fact checking yourself, I actually am I hired someone to fact check the fact checking book. I just
You
did.
hired a fact checker for the fact checking
I just
book?
did 2 days ago. I'm thrilled.
It's fascinating to me that you're writing a book about fact-checking, or even more interesting that you've managed to sell a book about fact-checking at a time when fact-checking is dying as an independent art.
I didn't really have to sell it. They already wanted it, so that was kind of a built-in thing. It was as long as I put together a proposal, it was okay with them. It was fine, but it's a guide on how to do it, and also, even though it's not ideal to fact-check your own work, it's also like, here's how you can apply this to your own work if you're blogging or you're writing and you don't have the luxury of fact-checking. These are the things you can do to at least, pump the brakes before you hit publish. Think about it a little bit before you publish.
That's very interesting.
Thank you.
Okay. I want to just say, Brooke, you have been an elegant study in good humor, and you've shared an extraordinary amount of your work and your life and your journey. And I just want to say to conclude that you are evidence of the adage that all those who wander are not lost. And I just want to thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For your evening.
Thanks. That feels weird, but thank you.